If you've clicked on a video called How to Know When You're Ready to Buy a Home in Toronto, I'm going to guess the answer you're looking for isn't just when rates drop. You already know it's much more complicated than that. So I've put together a free guide called the Toronto Move-Up Playbook that walks you through how to go from stuck in a condo to a backyard in roughly 24 months. The link is in the description. After helping quite a few Toronto families work through these decisions and navigating our own condo sale in 2023, when basically everyone around us said to wait, here's what I've learned. Readiness isn't really about market conditions. It's about breaking through what I would consider our 5 specific mental traps that keep people stuck even after the math makes sense. I want to walk you through each one, and for each, I'll try to offer maybe like a reframe that I think is actually useful, not just be brave and go buy that house. Here's what you need to know. I would say this is probably the most misunderstood part of the whole decision. Timing in Toronto real estate. People are kind of waiting for a perfect storm. Rates to come down, their condo recovers a bit, and inventory opens up all at the same time. And I get why that feels logical. You want all the conditions to line up before you commit. But the way this market actually works, at least in my experience, rates and prices operate on somewhat different cycles. They don't tend to cooperate with each other in the way that you'd hope. So for example, the Toronto average price fell from $1,142,637 in 2022 to around $945,000 in January of this year. That's the first time the average was under $1 million in 5 years, which is a pretty significant psychological shift, and yet rates didn't stop alongside that. They went up, they paused, they've come down, and yet prices for the most part have just kind of continued a relatively steady march down. So the perfect window that people have been waiting for kind of didn't materialize even when the price side moved substantially. Now, why does this trap feel so reasonable? I think that it's your brain genuinely trying to minimize regret. So if you wait for all the green lights, you can't really blame yourself for what happens. But while you're waiting for rates to hit 3% and condos like yours to bounce back to what you paid, the families who bought East York semis last spring at 5.5%, 6% are now starting to see their equity grow as house prices stabilize. Semi-detached homes are down about 5% year over year, detached around 8%, not catastrophic, but real savings for families who need to move anyway. So if you're planning for kids, that's potentially $64,000 to $90,000 less than what those same houses cost a year ago. So this can get particularly costly when you're already outgrowing your space. Every month you wait costs you lifestyle, not just money. And if kids are in the picture, the perfect financial moment has a funny way of arriving exactly when you are probably least equipped to handle a move. My wife and I ran into this in 2023. So between giving tenants notice and actually selling, the condo market got a lot worse over that time, over a relatively short period of time. And I genuinely considered just waiting until the spring of 2024, hoping that things were going to improve. But what I kept coming back to was the same thing that I would constantly be telling my clients. And it's this: operate in the market you know, not the market that you hope for. So for us, that turned out in hindsight to be the absolute right call. Toronto condo prices kept sliding, even right through to today. They're down roughly 23% from early 22 peaks. And I would say that condos are still finding their floor. So the practical takeaway here is fairly simple. If you can afford the house payment and the space that actually fits your life, that's probably your green light. Trying to time 2 markets at once for most people is a recipe for staying exactly where you are. Now, the second trap is a little bit sneakier because it kind of disguises itself as being responsible. So let's talk about the fortress of information. I see this one fairly often, and I think it's worth naming because smart people fall into it the most. So research has a point of diminishing returns. So after you've looked at 50 listings and you've read what feels like 20 market reports and you've run 15 different scenarios, I would say you're not really getting any smarter at that point. You are getting stuck. And there's a big difference between doing your homework and building a fortress of information that protects you from having to make any decision at all. Now, here's the psychology underneath that, I think. Smart people, and I mean this genuinely, use research as a shield. If you haven't made a decision yet, you can't make the wrong decision. But what tends to happen is that while you analyze every possible outcome, the houses that actually fit your family get bought by people who did enough research to feel confident, but not perfect. I watch this fairly often, couples who genuinely know more about the market than some agents, but can't pull the trigger on anything. You know you're in this loop when you're rereading the same market reports hoping for different conclusions, or you're eliminating houses for problems you could fix for $10,000, but you can't commit to a $1.2 million purchase. When you're spending more time researching than viewing homes, that's probably the line between preparation and procrastination. I think of it kind of like planning a wedding based on weather forecasts. You can check 15 apps, study seasonal patterns, look at historical data, and at some point you just have to pick a date. The couples who have great weddings aren't the ones who predicted the weather perfectly. They're the ones who planned for what they could control and adapted to what they couldn't. So set a research deadline. Once you understand the neighborhoods, you know the price ranges, you have your financing sorted out, you've probably done enough homework. And here's what I tell clients at that point. Everything after this is procrastination. And the tricky thing about procrastination is that when you're an analytical person, it tends to show up wearing the costume of preparation. And that's kind of what makes it expensive. And I'll interject by saying this, and I'm not saying this to try and lump myself into the category of smart people necessarily, but I get analysis paralysis fairly easily. It takes me a really long time to research something, to even do something as simple as like buying the right rain boots for our kids. Like I'm looking up how high cut, low cut might affect their, our oldest boy loves to run. And so it can get ridiculous sometimes. And I'm very guilty of it. So, speaking from the heart, and a lot of this stuff is hitting home even for me as I'm saying it. If you're wondering what enough research actually looks like in numbers, that's specifically what I break down in the Toronto Move-Up Playbook. There's a checklist built for couples who are around $300,000 in household income sitting in underwater condos, meaning it's worth less than what you paid. The link is in the description below. But even once you've crossed that line, there's still this voice that tends to creep in, and it usually shows up at dinner parties. Your friends, they bought in 2019, they were playing a completely different game. They had 2.5% interest rates, and they paid $900,000 for what costs probably $1.2 million today. Those were different rules entirely. Trying to recreate their timeline is kind of like trying to win in 2026, but with a 2019 playbook. Here's why comparison still feels useful even when it isn't. It genuinely is how we judge whether we're making smart decisions or not. But when you're comparing your 2026 situation to your friend's 2019 success, you end up feeling like permanently behind for the most part. And that feeling keeps you waiting for conditions that just aren't coming back. This hits hardest in pockets like Leslieville or Riverdale, for example, when someone at dinner casually mentions that they bought their semi for like $850,000 in 2019, and you walk away feeling like you missed the boat entirely. But what you missed was that particular moment, not every moment. The current Toronto East average for semis is around 1.18 million, with a median closer to 1.108 million. And that is your reality that you have to work with, for better or for worse. Now, here's the math that I think actually matters. If you take an $80,000 loss on your condo, but you buy a house that's down 5% from last year and almost 19% on average from the peak in 2022, there's a reasonable argument that you can come out ahead in 2 years when house prices recover and when condo prices might stay flat over the next little while, which I think is what might happen until about 2028, 2029. So your friend's timing was great for them. Your timing is about what's available to you right now with the income and the savings that you have today. So the useful comparison isn't to like other people's past decisions. It's other 2021 condo buyers who are making their moves today. Now, there's one timeline pressure that tends to create even more urgency than like peer comparison. And this one I want to handle very carefully. A baby due date isn't a house closing deadline. And I get why it feels like one. There's this story that we kind of tell ourselves that good parents have the nursery ready, they've got the backyard set up, everything is figured out before the baby arrives. So if you're not in your forever home by like month 6, then you kind of feel like you're already behind before you've even started. But here's what I actually see happen. Couples who rush into the wrong house because of baby pressure often regret it for years, not because they moved, but because they let what they considered was a timeline make a 30-year decision for them. The stress of moving with a newborn is real, but it's also temporary, and it's something that you can get through. The stress of being in a house that doesn't fit your family follows you for a lot longer than that, and it can be a lot more costly as well. The mental reframe that I want to offer, and I find this one actually lands, is to imagine getting a text from yourself 5 years from now. Which message would you rather receive? Hey, thanks for taking the time to find the right place, even if the first few months with the baby were tight in the condo. Or, why did we rush into this house just because of the due date? And underneath all of these pressures, timing, research, comparison, the baby deadline, there's usually one more thing, and it's the hardest one to say out loud. And I want you to hear this because it's probably the most important thing I'll say in this entire video. I think a lot of people, and I'd say this is probably more common than people admit, are carrying something that goes far beyond the financial concern. It's this worry that if they have to make another move that doesn't go perfectly, it confirms something about themselves. Like maybe buying in 2021 was already proof that they got it wrong, and moving again when it still doesn't feel clean, I guess, would be proof number 2. I understand that. I really do. Smart people genuinely hate being wrong twice about the same thing. And when you watch your condo lose value, every decision feels like you're being judged against that history. We sold our condo in 2023. I'm a real estate agent. I can't tell you how many times I thought about how much I wish that we sold in 2021 or 2022. And I thought about the money that we, for lack of a better word, lost by selling later on in 2023. Now, here's where I'm going to push back a little. Staying put isn't a neutral move. Staying in a condo your family has already outgrown because you're worried about what another difficult transaction is going to look like, that's also a choice. And in my experience, it's the choice people tend to regret more quietly over a longer period of time. So here's the framing that I would offer for this part. Using 2021 as expensive tuition to make a better decision in 2026 shows judgment, not weakness. Condo loss is already baked in, whether you move or whether you stay. The only variable left is whether you carry it in a space that fits your life or one that doesn't. So, readiness. Here's what I'd say it actually looks like. You've stopped waiting for perfect conditions. You've done enough research to feel confident, not paralyzed. You're making decisions based on your current reality, not on other people's past success. You're planning around your family's actual timeline, not arbitrary deadlines. And you've accepted that making the right move for your family matters more than being right about market timing. Look, I'm a realtor. I am well aware that I benefit when people buy and sell houses, so take what I've said with that in mind. Of course, absolutely. The families that I've seen make moves they're actually happy with aren't the ones who waited for the perfect conditions. They're the ones who got clear on what they needed, they got honest about what they could afford, and they stopped letting the 2021 version of themselves make the 2026 decision. The Toronto Move-Up Playbook walks exactly through this framework, from stuck in a condo to a backyard in roughly 24 months. The link is in the description. Now, once the timing question is kind of settled, the next thing that comes up is almost always, okay, but exactly how long is this actually going to take? Most agents probably will say 30 to 60 days, and I'd say that estimate, with all due respect, is fairly significantly wrong. Planning around it will add a lot of unnecessary stress. I get into exactly what the real timeline looks like and why in Why Your Agent is Wrong About Your Moving Timeline right here.